Court of Appeal expressed in an implicit way, perhaps in some parts rather explicit, that 377A is unlikely to survive another constitutional challenge because it infringes Article 12, which is a provision that provides for equality before the law and equal protection of the law. And so I think the right thing to do for any government, would be to respond accordingly. And in this case, to avoid, a situation where the courts were to strike it down. If the court, were to strike down 377A, certainly the courts will be mindful that many of our public policies are built on the basis of marriage being between a man and a woman. But unlike Parliament, they may not be able to see or be able to appreciate some of the deeper ramifications of public policy. And so that could perhaps create even more uncertainty, where the law is concerned. It could result in even more litigation.
I get Eugene's point that, you don't just, the impact of just declaring one particular piece of legislation as void or unconstitutional may have unintended consequences on the workings of other pieces of legislation, and therefore a more considered response through a complete review of affected legislation may be the smoother, wiser, more manageable way forward. But unfortunately, that is not the way forward that the government has said it will take. Unfortunately, the government is actually saying nothing else changes. So, while Eugene has sketched out what would be the right thing to do, in fact, that is not what they are doing. And that's really, really disappointing.
The court did not indicate at all that the definition of marriage in our statute books is potentially unconstitutional. The courts did not have to decide on that, and so they express no opinion. The concern really arises, I think, where the government, for the government, the concern is that that there could be constitutional challenge, right, on whether the legal definition of marriage is that between a voluntary monogamous union of a man and a woman, whether that's constitutional, that could be game for lawsuits, and the government has taken the view, that this is something that should be decided, through the democratic process.
We need to be united, in intellectual consistency against discrimination on all fronts, right? I mean, we can all, because we've been tutored this way for years, we can all unite against discrimination based on religion, race, and so on, but also based on worldviews. We should not be discriminated on just because we have a different worldview. And here I think we need to do a bit more tutoring of our society, and we need to be a bit more united around this.
By the continued use of terminology like that, which is offensive and paints that target community as somehow unreasonably dogmatic LGBT ideology, or misbehaving and generally immoral or unethical gay lifestyle, I think that actually continues this institutionalization of discrimination. So although it is bad that today we have some people who are suffering from the reverse kind of this discrimination, and that should not be condoned, let's not forget that LGBT people have suffered in independent Singapore some 50 years of policy-based, as you said in your words, Rizwa, thank you very much, discrimination. And I'm afraid, trying to paint the conservatives as now the new victims of discrimination is not going to wash.
I can understand what Alex is saying. I mean, I get it, because he was at the pioneer, right, of championing for gay rights when, the society and the background was totally different from what it is today. So I of course, I understand, given the weight of what he has faced before and how he has, pushed the boundaries and in many ways raised awareness in across Singapore society, and the weight that he had to bear, pushing through all those barriers. I can understand how he is, informed by that, and how he's very alert, to these terms and so on. So, I'd be grateful for anything that I can learn in terms of what better way to phrase things that I am trying to phrase using a form of words to explain the things I'm trying to explain.
Sometimes we do mention the words LGBTQ lifestyle or LGBTQ ideology. Is for myself, I've met so many people who have experienced LGBTQ, for example, same-sex attractions, or they have identity issues of whether they feel male or female in this kind of issues, but they do not actually want to enter the activism or the lifestyle choices. So that's why I think there is that differentiation, because even the people in that LGBT community are not homogeneous.
If we continue to come from the vantage of the ends of this spectrum, then we continue to struggle with where do we go? How do we move this conversation and this needle? I would also add that, I would like to propose that we go beyond tolerance. If we want to actually come together, then it's not just tolerance that we should be looking at, but actually understanding and accepting, right? There are differences between us. And this is not just for, obviously, the pro and anti, LGBTQ or repeal of 377A. I think this understanding needs to come about if we want to be able to accept and live, together.
It's a shift, right? It's a shift from one spectrum to another spectrum where people are feeling again a bit unsafe. And I think we need to come to a center where no matter which area of the spectrum that you are coming from, that you should feel safe to candidly, to be honest, voice out your own personal principles, your own personal understandings.
There's often a lot of animosity, a lot of apprehensions that keep us believing that these people, the LGBT community, does not really have a human face. So I think that lack of friendships and coming together to truly have such dialogues like this is missing thus far. And this is the key to really laying out a lot of the issues that both communities struggle with.
I think that there is a concern that litigation will fray social cohesion, and the idea here is that we need to let these attitudes evolve. And I think when you mention the surveys, I think they do suggest that attitudes are evolving. But I'm not so sure that surveys deep dive enough. I think if you ask most Singaporeans, they will certainly agree that discrimination against LGBT or anyone is probably
or any form of discrimination.
Yeah, but I think if surveys were to delve further and to see whether they are in support of same-sex marriage, then I'm not so sure, because we don't have the data on it.
There may be a perception that the conservative part of society is dogmatic, belligerent, partly out of ignorance or partly out of just fearing something they don't understand, or partly out of a desire to deny somebody something that someone else wants, right? So one of the things that keep cropping up in my understanding of some parts of the conservative society that I've begun to understand is that there is a concern around marriage in relation to children in particular, and their interest is in protecting children. So in that context, they work backwards, right? And they realize that the one step to children is marriage. So there is a lot of effort to safeguard the interests of children as one aspect of this.
You mentioned exactly those words, protecting children, but you don't say protecting children from what? Because that is the unstated kind of dog whistle. I'm sorry, it's kind of a dog whistle. All right, because by using terms like that, one presupposes that the LGBT lifestyle is somehow predatory or morally indefensible, and therefore children must not be exposed to that.
I suppose for some of us, we would anecdotally understand, the trauma that, let's say, children of divorced parents go through, and as a result, there may be consequences to their upbringing and how they cope with life later on and so on. So, we don't dispute that in the case of opposite-sex parents. And what I'm drawn to is the narrative that some tell me, well, if that's the case for the opposite-sex parents, why would that change just because same-sex parents are now parents of the child? Because the child of a same-sex parents will have the same background of origin as the cases I just mentioned. And if we would accept that, those children statistically can do worse as a result of their background of origin, why would it not be applicable just because the parents are same-sex? Now, this is not denigrating same-sex parents as incapable and so on, right? So I'm just saying, these studies seem to indicate that.
I'm one with a firm belief that children have a natural right to a father and mother endowed by nature. So that is something that I think was what he was trying to emphasize. And this is something that our society so far still embraces if you look at national survey results. And I think that currently this discussion does indeed lead to the further downstream changes that would talk about the rights of children to have a father and a mother.
When we talk about family, I think a lot of this discussion is centered around the centrality, the importance, the salience of family, both within secular and religious perspectives as well. And I think this is something that, coming from someone in the queer community, with both a very supportive biological family as well as a very supportive chosen family, from members of my community, I think this is something that I very much appreciate. And what's at the core of family, ultimately, what's at the core of functional, healthy family relationships, supportive family relationships, is about care through kinship, whatever this kinship looks like.
The proposed changes to the law can perhaps provide the structure and the rules, but they do not imbue us, with the requisite values and norms to build bridges, across differences. Can we have principled disagreements while being in community? And by community, I mean one that is constituted of and denominated by diversity as well as staunch beliefs. The second is, how do we love our neighbor, who does not share the same values as us?
There are a lot of people who conceive of law as something analogous to the 10 Commandments received by Moses. Thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that. Actually, good law should be protective rather than prescriptive. In other words, good law should just recognize that this is how people form their supportive networks. This is how people form their families, caring and supportive, as Carissa said. And then the law should step in then and protect these formations, social formations that people have made, rather than prescribe, you shall make this kind of family and you shall not make that kind of family. I think that's an important point to remember. That's the purpose of law, because if law is too prescriptive, law becomes divisive, because somebody is out there is going to say, that doesn't apply to me, or that's no good for me, or whatever. So for law to be inclusive and supportive, law must support what exists substantially.
It is clear, Vishwa, from this evening that we do need to dialogue on the grounds of reason, with the desire to understand, and with the objective, I would suggest, of trying to reach for the overall greater good of our nation. So I personally would welcome further dialogue to refine the input that we should have in the public square to our society, to our culture, and even to our government on what is good for our nation, what is good for our people as a whole. Now, I personally desire such dialogue even when we deal with diversity and differences, not to drive division and belligerence in society. We are actually leading our society by the example we set tonight, as we've done with the young people here. We should care for the unity and greater good of our nation because this is our backyard. We live here, and for many of us, we have nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful for the good intentions that were infused in tonight. And I look forward to many more such good intentions in dialogues of the future.
And in all the conversations we talked about, we should really be asking for an anti-discrimination law that probably will unite all of us, right? In every aspect of our lives. So that's what's come up for me. The second thing that's come up for me is this, this idea of the legal and moral codes, right? And I think Eugene and Alex alluded to that. I think as much as laws should reflect, the social norms, as you said, visual. It should also be, engendering, right, the values and the kind of society that we want to be. So it plays two roles. It's not just one, and that's come strongly to me. On the note of the family, I would have to agree that, instead of looking at the form and obsessing over the form, that we really need to take a step back. As someone who's working on the ground, even the most traditional of family units are so broken, right? And children are struggling and all of that. So I think, on the ground, I'm seeing that the form really doesn't ensure, safety of the children, nor having a thriving family. So we really should take a step back and ask ourselves as a society, right, what provides for a family that will give stability and safety and therefore allow everyone in the family to thrive.
We need to recognize and, yes, accept that societal attitudes and mores are changing, especially among the younger generation. This is a reality. This is the reality. In his National Day rally speech, Prime Minister Lee put it most aptly, in my view, quote, "In a society where diverse groups have strongly held opposing views, everyone has to accept that no group has or can have things all their way." Close. As in any change, there will be adversity, there will be discomfort, there'll be tension, intolerance, there'll be insecurity, and there will certainly be anger. But that doesn't mean that we should not embrace change. Change is going to happen whether we like it or not. So we might as well go with it and partake in conversations along the way. The internet, especially social media, can be a platform for meaningful conversations. It can also heighten negative emotions and make us feel we are under siege. It is precisely during times such as this when our mettle is tested as one people. Do we want to act on righteousness and self-righteousness, or believe in restraint and accommodation as a shared interest, a higher calling, so to speak? We have a choice. We have come a long way since 1965, because it's seldom been about you or about me. We have come a long way together because it's often been about us. It's about shared interests. Let's continue talking with each other. More importantly, let's listen. This has been Inconvenient Questions.